Good morning, everyone. Sorry I'm a little bit late. One thing about so far in January of 26, it's not a boring time to be in government or politics or international affairs. So I've got three things at the top, and then I'll turn it over to Catherine to screen your questions. First is, and I think most of policymakers on both sides of the aisle, and frankly all of the business markets, were more than a little bit astonished when President Trump's retribution attacks against the Federal Reserve turned into potentially a criminal probe against the Fed chair, Jay Powell. Unprecedented, clearly due to undermine the independence of the Fed. And I won't totally nerd out here, but the Federal Reserve was set up at the around 1913 because America had gone through a series of panics around the financial situation, and the idea of a central bank that could help control interest rates was set up so that we didn't have these rounds of booms and busts. And generally speaking, Federal Reserve worked very well. It is well respected around the world as the leading central bank around the world. Its job is to try to keep inflation low, but it's also try to get to full employment. It's got what's called a dual mandate. And the independence of the Fed is critical because politicians of both political parties, presidents, Congresses, always want to try to influence the Fed, for example, about setting interest rates, because you lower interest rates, people can go ahead and then borrow easier. It drives the economy a bit, but if that's done on a political basis, people lose faith in the institutions. And at the end of the day, attacking the Fed's independence or going after Jay Powell, which even the Republicans have now pushed back on, and all of the former Fed chairs under Democrats and Republicans, I believe most every one of the former Treasury secretaries have all said this is crazy. What does it affect Virginians? Well, this level of uncertainty will drive up interest costs because people will say we can't count on the American economy to run with any kind of independent backstop. That means it's going to cost more to borrow money. That'll mean your mortgage rates will go up. It'll mean your credit card rates will go up. It'll mean if you're trying to buy a car, your car loan will go up. Your student debt will go up. Higher interest rates means higher direct costs to all Americans. And we already know the one thing that Americans care the most about right now, and Virginians as well, is affordability. They want their government to help lower costs. And what President Trump has done by this, retribution attack against Jay Powell is going to do the exact opposite. That coming on top of the fact that the president seems entirely focused on international affairs as opposed to lowering costs. And you've got a recipe for disaster. So the Fed is the first issue. The second is I've got a vote today on a CRA that I put forward. This is an ability for Congress to come in and unwind an administrative decision by an administration. And the administrative decision that I'm trying to unwind goes about what the Trump administration put in place on how you access the healthcare marketplace, the so-called Obamacare marketplace. Now, this is totally separate from the debate about the tax credits that expired at the end of December, throwing people into rates 2 and 3 times higher than they were last year. The CRA I'm working on today goes after a rewrite of the administrative rules of how you access the marketplace, adds a lot of additional paperwork, adds a lot of additional burden. It's estimated it will drive up the cost of healthcare about $3 billion, and about 2 million Americans could lose healthcare just from the administrative hassles put in place. Why were they put in place? Frankly, because the administration hates the Affordable Care Act and is going to do everything possible to try to undermine it. I know a lot of my Republican friends are now concerned about healthcare costs going up. They could vote with me today on this CRA, and we could start to provide some relief in terms of the administrative burden, or not making it even harder to get health care. I'm not holding my breath, but they will have a chance to come down on cheaper health care costs or more expensive health care costs later this afternoon. Finally, and I'm not going to go through, unless you guys ask me questions about, Venezuela, Iran, all of the international activities taking place, but I did think it was interesting. There's going to be a bipartisan group of senators going to Denmark on Friday. Remember, Denmark controls Greenland. It is part of Denmark. The Danish foreign minister is going to try to go to the White House tomorrow. But this, again, I think, crazy approach that the president has, threatening military force to take over Greenland, and which, by the way, we already have an existing treaty with Denmark about Greenland that allows us to almost do anything we want. We already have a military base in Greenland. But if the president were to take military action against Denmark, a NATO ally, it would destroy NATO, our strongest, longest-term alliance post-World War II. This is so concerning that the British government and the German government are now sending troops to Greenland. So if we were to try to take action, not only would we be potentially attacking Denmark, but we could actually have American troops fighting against British and German troops. You can't make this up. And at one point, the president is talking about the fact that, well, he's concerned that the Russians could get access to some of the rare earth minerals and others in Greenland. If he cares about Russian expansionism, he ought to do more to stand by our ally in Ukraine, who's candidly fighting NATO's battle in many ways against the Russians right now, where Russians have already lost 1 million soldiers, instead of undermining Ukraine's ability to fight back at seemingly every turn. So lots of other questions to get to, but I'll stop there, recognizing I was late. So turn it over to Catherine to go ahead and screen your questions or take your questions.
Our first question is from Mitchell with WTOP.
Good morning, Senator. As always, thanks for joining us. I have a question related to Homeland Security and ICE. I wanted to get your view of how you think ICE is operating, and do you think the Department of Homeland Security funding should be held up to make reforms, as some of your colleagues have urged?
Listen, they have, the administration has tried to increase the ICE budget huge. A lot of it in the big ugly bill that passed last year. ICE has a budget that's bigger than the FBI at this point. It's almost the size of the French military alone, which is a pretty remarkable factoid. So I think if there are ways to limit the increase in spending on ICE, I'm open to that. I'm not open to the point of trying to shut down the government again. I think our region went through the longest government shutdown in American history last fall. I don't think we need to repeat that. But there are reasons to ask questions. Remember, while the individual involved in the Minnesota shooting was a long-term ICE agent, he was also someone who had been, I think, drugged by a car or something in an earlier confrontation earlier last summer. But overall, as we look at this building up of the ICE workforce, they've taken the training period from 5 or 6 months down to 47 days. And 47 days, you wonder why? Well, it's because Donald Trump's the 47th president. And the traditional role of ICE, which was to not go into neighborhoods and randomly round up people and turning them into a quasi-military force, I've got questions about. And I can't speak to all of them. And I'm old-fashioned, Mitchell. I think the tragedy of the shooting, American citizen killed in Minnesota, we ought to have a full investigation, federal and state. It ought to be involved, and I'm going to reserve judgment until the investigation is finished. But I know this much. ICE appears to have a daily quota of how many people they have to pick up. And here in Virginia, and I believe this reflects also national numbers, over 75% of the people who've been picked up by ICE have no prior criminal record. So this is far different than what the president talked about, that we're going to get the rapists and murderers who've entered our country inappropriately off the streets. I think we've all seen images in Virginia and around the country of masked ICE agents picking up moms as they drop off kids for school, or dads as they're going to work. And the level of terror that's put in, particularly to our immigrant communities, particularly Latino communities in Virginia, is pretty devastating.
Thank you very
Our
much.
second question is from Cameron with WVNS.
Morning, Senator. Thanks for taking the time. I know you've been vocal about your thoughts on AI and the risks and challenges it can present. A new report has shown that as many as 1.5 million jobs in Virginia could be impacted by changes related to AI. Not necessarily job loss, but at least changing or augmenting of those roles. What are your thoughts on sort of regulation and the challenges AI presents, not only to the youth, but to the workforce?
Yeah. First of all, let's acknowledge Congress has had a horrible record on putting any kind of guardrails on social media. And I think most of us would agree if we'd done that a decade ago, we'd have a heck of a lot healthier kids. And the transformation brought about by social media is tiny compared to the transformation brought about by artificial intelligence. There are issues around, kids being exposed to AI, becoming dependent upon chatbots for friends, or turning to AI tools as a therapy method. And there's been some pretty awful stories in that domain, and there are some efforts going on to try to put some limits. I'm not sure we're going to do anything at a federal basis. That's why I think we can't preclude states from acting. I'd love to have some major federal legislation so there'd be a single law, but if we don't do that, I think the states need to act. But where I'm particularly focused is on AI job elimination. I've got a bill with Josh Hawley to try to at least measure what's happening. And where I see potentially in the short term, the biggest challenge is the fact that traditional jobs for kids coming out of college are going to be eliminated. You're not going to need that young analyst at a firm. We've already seen that recent college graduate unemployment's at about 9%. I think that number over the next 3 years could go to 25%. Some AI CEOs like Dario Amati at Anthropic have said that we could go to 50% of job elimination, but I think 25% over the next couple of years could be devastating, not only to those young people, but to their parents who've probably paid $200,000 in debt to put their kid through college. And I'm working with some of the AI companies, frankly, as well as trying to get the best ideas possible on how we can grapple with this economic transformation. At the end of the day, I think AI will have a lot of benefits. I think there will be AI jobs created. But this interim 3 to 5 years, I think could be hugely disruptive and have serious economic consequences. So I hope over the coming weeks to come out with a couple of policy proposals on how we can train up so that you are AI equipped as you go into the workplace. And it's hard. I mean, if we go way back in time, like 3 years ago, the idea we all thought was with this transformation coming about, well, let's at least make everyone learn how to computer code, and that will give them some level of guarantee of employment. Well, we've quickly found that those early coder jobs are some of the ones that are being eliminated at the fastest rate because the AI tools can do that better, particularly than a young human coming into the workforce. So this is a huge issue. I think it'll become a major political issue. There's not an obvious, simple answer. I think it's going to take a sophisticated response, and I hope it'll be bipartisan. There's no Democrat or Republican version of AI, and we're going to need the AI industry at large to help work with us on this, because if they don't, you're already seeing majority of Americans, particularly young Americans, being very, very nervous about the AI changes. And well, I think there'll be AI benefits. We may not get to those if we can't get through this transition.